Good morning, everyone. Professor Kavita Sharma, who is the speaker of today's session, and Dr. Geetesh, and other viewers and friends, well-wishers who have all assembled here to eagerly listen to uh, Dr. Kavita Sharma's talk. I welcome you all for our webinar series on Mahābhārata, initiated under the aegis of the project Yoga Consciousness in Mahābhārata, the ethical value of societal and political well-being, which is sponsored by a scheme called Scheme for Promotion of Academic and Research Collaboration, which is a part of MHR, the Ministry of Human Resource Development Initiative of Government of India. And our team members in this project are Professor Vishwa Adluri from Hunter College, USA, Dr. Joydeep Bagchi from Hindu University of America, Dr. Geetesh Nirban from Kamala Nehru College, Delhi University, Delhi, and me, Professor Balaganapati from Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. And we have two more young colleagues who are working under the project, Jay Shri and Anmol. And this is the team which has come together to look at the project that I have already mentioned the title of. There are three important pointers that I thought I should mention as a prelude to what is the need of getting into this kind of a webinar. Why did we initiate this program, this series at all under this project? There are three pointers which are very important for us in this project. One of the pointers is yoga consciousness in Mahābhārata and Bhagavad Gita. Yoga consciousness is quite popular these days in many ways and many forms, in varied forms, in fact. But Mahābhārata is the one which prepares the ground for any kind of discussion further on yoga. Though we have a philosophical system called yoga, but it is Mahābhārata which in fact tries to address it at the level of society and individual as well as society. So societal well-being, if we are referring to societal well-being, then the text in relation to yoga consciousness, then the text that we should visit is Mahābhārata, and that is one of the pointers of this project. And the second pointer of the project is ethical value of social well-being. No, we have been talking about social well-being, but unless we ground it properly in the ethical value, then it becomes very wrongly represented. And the third pointer that we have is ethical value of political well-being. So these are the three pointers with which we have began our journey into the project. And it also has three objectives, broader objectives. One of them is trying to understand yoga in relation to societal and political well-being, and also trying to reappropriate the classical texts in the light of contemporary concerns. And the third objective that we have in this project is explicating universal, philanthropic, and humanitarian aspects of the text Mahābhārata. These are the objectives that we have. Now, in addition to the objectives and the pointers that I have mentioned, very focused question that the project tries to address, in fact, which would be the central question of the talk of Professor Kavita Sharma as well, would be, what is the right course of action? No, this always fascinates us, intrigues us, pushes us to struggle with what is the right course of action. At every point of time, we come across this question, and this requires special attention, especially when we are in a kind of a crisis, when we are in a kind of confusion, ambiguity, and especially when we are in dilemma. What is the right course of action is the main concern in all these situations. And what is the right kind of action that is conducive to the well-being of individual, and what is the right kind of action that is conducive to the well-being of the society and polity? These are larger questions that have been discussed very well, threadbare in the text Mahābhārata, especially the movement from I to we. I to we is very important in understanding societal well-being Recently, one of my wonderful colleague has explained this, saying that uh, the movement from I to we is movement from illness to wellness. No? In illness, you remove I and add we, then what you find is wellness. So he says the movement from I to we is, in fact, it is a movement from illness to wellness. Very well said. So taking it further, like if we are going to talk about societal well-being, then what is that is required is how do we transcend the biases, internal biases, and sectorial prejudices, and how do we go beyond them, and how do we address the dilemmas that we come across in our life. And this is the major concern with which the project also has begun, and it would be addressing. And coming to the present situation, like we understand that in the COVID-19 pandemic, because of COVID-19 pandemic, we are all in a kind of crisis. And whenever humanity or any individual is in crisis, what is it that is required? We all look for a solution. And if we are looking for a solution, what do we do? Looking for solution, we look for resources for the solution. That is what is required. We have to look for resources for the solution. And the solutions could be internal as well as external. External solutions sometimes work out well, but internal solutions are very much required for any kind of the success of external resources even. So that is where we have to look at what are these internal solutions that we are looking at. And internal solutions are the self and the tradition in which the self is rooted. This is how it takes us. The present pandemic situation takes us to one of the classical epics of Indian tradition called Mahābhārata. And so we are here to reach Mahābhārata, look for resources that that it has to offer to us to address the present kind of situation and the kind of dilemmas that we are coming across every day, whether I should do this or whether I shouldn't do it, kind of situations that we are coming across, which are prompting us to look at the question, what is the right course of action? And we have a wonderful senior colleague, a researcher and a scholar on Mahābhārata, Professor Kavita Sharma, who would be addressing these issues. And just to say a little thing about the structure, in fact, Dr. Gitesh has already said it. The structure of the event would be something like this. Professor Kavita Sharma, after I stop, Dr. Gitesh would introduce Professor Kavita Sharma for a few minutes, and then Professor Kavita Sharma would speak for 45 minutes, and then we'll have 30 minutes of the discussion, and that is how the event concludes. Over to you, Dr. Gitesh Nirman. Thank you very much, ma'am, for accepting once again. Sure.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Dr. Bala.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So we have today with us Dr. Kavita A. Sharma. She is an eminent scholar. She's been the president of South Asian University in New Delhi from 2014 to 2019. She has taught at Hindu College, Delhi University for about 37 years, out of which she has served as its principal for 10 years. She was the director of India International Center, New Delhi from 2008 to 2014. She has been a recipient of Indo-Canadian Shastri Fellowship twice. She has also been awarded the Fulbright Fellowship New Century Scholarship 2007 to 8 for research on higher education in the 21st century, access and equity. She has several published books to her credit. I would name few of them here. Winds of the Mill, Queens of Mahābhārata, our ever favorite, and Birds, Beasts, Men and Nature in Mahābhārata. Most of the Mahābhārata scholars have read it. Life as is, Teachings from Mahābhārata. Yes, ma'am, we've read this also. Internalization from the internationalization of higher education, an aspect of Indian foreign relations. 60 years of University Grants Commission.
I think that's enough.
And I think there are a lot of books that are there which I may not be mentioning. I'm focusing more upon Mahābhārata books. And apart from all these various publications that she has to her credit, she has contributed extensively to research journals, and she participates most enthusiastically in all the national and the international conferences, seminars, India and abroad, where she speaks on subjects ranging from higher education, gender issues, diaspora, and Mahābhārata. We have with us Dr. Kavita Sharma, who's been the principal of the college where I studied at a point of time, had a wonderful opportunity receiving an award from her during the post-graduation days. Ma'am,
I didn't know that. Thank you.
You had a lot of students under you, so we had one principal, so we knew who was our principal very well. So ma'am, thank you for being with us, and over to you now to shed your light on the very important topic, ethical dilemmas in Mahābhārata. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jitesh and Dr. Bala, and everyone who's joined in here on a Saturday morning, leaving, I'm sure, many other more interesting things. I will do my best, but Jitesh, if I'm going over the time, just gesture. And if I'm under it, we can take more questions. Okay. Now, when we talk of ethical dilemmas, this is really our translation of what the text calls as dharma. Because there is no such thing as ethical dilemmas talked in Mahābhārata. And dharma has many meanings. It has been wrongly translated into English. That's the problem with language translations. It is not religion, it is not ritual, it is really a way of life. It is a code of conduct. It is to decide how to, exactly what Dr. Bala said, how to act. What are the parameters to use when we are acting? And very interesting thing is that the word dharma comes from the root word dhri, from which comes dharti, from which comes dharan. So it is an ability to endure for what you think is right. It is an ability to accept that there will be suffering in this world. So just as Shiva can accept the poison and yet remain Shiva. So we have to accept. So it is dharti, dharan, dharma, all come from the same root. And of course, there are many times we are very confused. We don't know how to act because there seem to be multiple options and each seem equally valid. So how do you act? Now, the Mahābhārata, the way this is structured, it takes up the question and it puts it into different characters, different times, different circumstances, so that you learn to explore all the different facets of the same question. So at different points it says, go to the scriptures, see what guidance they give you. Go to wise men, go to your teachers, see what they tell you. What is good for the majority, look at that and then see. But the basic touchstone is ask yourself whether my action will be uplifting, will be nourishing, will be nurturing, and then Mahābhārata leaves the final decision to you. It does not say do this or do that, because you have to take that decision according to your own values and your own evolution. Now, of course, there are two very major dilemmas, because the Mahābhārata war is, to begin with, you have the dilemma of Arjun, and at the end, you have the dilemma of Yudhishthira. Now, dilemma of Arjun is more and more commented upon, but people forget the dilemma of Yudhishthira, because he has gone into this war, he has, but at the end, when he sees the carnage, then he says, I cannot. Every blade of grass is soaked in the blood of my people. How can I govern a place like this? And then he is not in the same elaborate way. He doesn't have Krishna to teach him. So he is taught that it is his duty now. The only duty he has is that he must govern the nation, his kingdom, and bring it back to a balance of truth, justice, value systems that had gone haywire in the interim period. So let's first deal with the macro dilemmas and then we'll come to little dilemmas, that because there is no character here who does not face a dilemma. If I were to start on this, I could spend days just pointing out from the text. So let's do some macro things. Now, Arjun. Why Arjun? Why is he so commented upon? Because we identify with Arjun. It's very easy to identify with him. He's an ambitious man. He's a good looking man, travels a lot. He is a man of action. He doesn't have time like Yudhishthira to sit there and keep pondering around with the sages. He is dealing with worldly problems. How do I acquire the arms? How do I clear the forest? How do I gain the kingdom? He, like us, gets elated. He gets dejected. He is the one who feels honored. He feels insulted. So he is like us, and he is confused like us. Like we are confused, so he is also confused. So what adds to greater to his confusion than it adds to us, if we can imagine it, that whatever action he does, it's a matter of life and death, and not a matter of life and death for an individual, but it's a question of annihilation. And that is why maybe Oppenheimer said, oh, it's like the blaze of 1,000 suns, right? So Gita is actually, the word comes from a song. It's a song. But in our context, it's a spiritual song. And of course, our Bhagavad Gita is the most famous, most popular, most commented upon. But there are many, many Gitas. Just to give you a few examples, you have the Ram Gita, in which Ram teaches his brother Lakshman. You have the Hans Gita in the Bhagavatam, where you have Krishna giving his final discourse to Uddhav before he dies himself. You have the Guru Gita, where Shiv teaches Parvati about the value of Guru. You have the Shiva Gita, where Shiv teaches Ram. And of course, you have the Anu Gita, you have the Ashtavakra Gita. So you have a lot of Gitas. But the Gita that has been accepted as a universal guide is the Bhagavad Gita. Again, Bhagavad Gita, many people study it, but they study it with different perspectives. They see it as a Dharma Granth, many people do it as an Upanishad, many do it as a Yoga Shastra, many look at it as an Adhyatma Shastra. But for me, and there are lots of Gitas that I have read and interpretations, for me, Tilak's Gita Rahasya is very important. As an aside, let me tell you, I did once a paper on Tilak, Gandhi, and Aurobindo, more or less contemporaries who all read Gita in the prison and pondered over it and wrote about it in the prison. And amazingly, reading the same chapter 2, they arrived at completely different notions of what they thought of Gita. Gandhi arrived at non-violence, Aurobindo arrived at the Superman, and it is only Tilak who said it is what Gita is primarily, it is Karma Yoga. So now, how to act? So what is the underlying thing that Krishna is telling you? He's saying there's never a problem. No problem actually exists. It's only a situation. And when you find yourself physically, materially, emotionally, psychologically unable to deal with it, does it become a problem? I think that needs, for us, when we act, it's not a problem. It's a situation. And how do you deal with that situation? And the first response is to escape. Arjun says, I can't do. He had gone very confidently, told Krishna, put my chariot in the middle of the two armies. I want to assess what's the formations and things. When he is actually confronted with his teachers, with his uncles, with his grandfather, with his his cousins, his brothers, it fails him. I can't do it. Now, I'm sure we've also come across many situations like that. We say, I'm going to do this. When it actually comes to doing it, the courage fails us. So the courage fails him. The second response that we always have to a situation is we want to change it. Right? We say, no, if I change this situation, I'll be fine. I'll be happy. Arjun, of course, can't change the situation. And the third response we have is that we suffer. Of course, changing the situation doesn't mean you'll solve the problem, you'll get into another situation. Now you suffer and you curse and you complain, and we come across every day people saying, तकदीर खराब है, मेरी माँ ने ये किया, मेरे फादर ने ये किया, मेरे संग ये हो गया, मेरे जॉब में ये हो गया. So we curse, complain, and everybody. And then that, we must understand, only intensifies the suffering. It doesn't solve the problem. So how do you find the right path? Sri Krishna realizes that we are into a crisis, and if this fellow doesn't recover from it, then there is no possibility of any war being won by the Pandavas. And the war has to be won. So the action takes place at various levels. It is a cosmic imbalance. We believe in the notion of karma. Now, karma is a very misunderstood word. Karma actually comes from the word kri, which means, the root word is kri, which means action, activity. So, you know, the Rita is a law, universal cosmic law, which creates cause and effect of our actions. It has nothing to do with religion at all. It is completely irreligious. It's just a law of cause and effect. Now, so he has to bring about an inner transformation of Arjuna. Now, to me, the way he does it, he marshals all kinds of arguments to convince. It's like almost a lawyer arguing in the court. Do this, do this. If not this, this is the alternative. This is the third alternative. But finally, Arjun is not convinced. So he says, okay, let me show you my Virat root. Otherwise, if Arjun got convinced, he won't have to show him the Virat root. So let me show you my Virat. And finally, he says, now you see, you are not the doer. All this has already happened. And a very important thing that T.S. Eliot also then took, past, present, and future are, we think of them as a linear progression, but they all exist simultaneously. That's a different topic and different question. But so he says, you are not the doer. This action already has taken place. It has to be. And so get out of your egoistical thinking that I'm going to kill. I'm going to do this. Now, in our lives also, a lot of things happen because I becomes very supreme, as Dr. Bala was saying. I'm going to do this. I did this. How dare somebody oppose me? So he says, no, you did nothing. Leave it all to me. Act and leave it all to me. We'll come to that. So even Tilak, because he's sitting in the Mandalay prison when he's writing Gita Rahasya, he realizes that the primary thing that the Gita is telling us is, you cannot escape, you cannot change the situation, you cannot just go on cursing and ranting and suffering. You have to act. It's a battle of life. So again, Arjun's dilemma works within us. We are always full of this or that, this or that. And it is also an external situation. We have to fight it with equanimity. And therefore, difficulties have to come in our way when we take a decision, but now how to do it. So, Krishna points out to Arjun that no one in this world can escape action. And no created being can escape action. Even to stay alive, you are acting, you're breathing, you're eating, you're drinking, you're sleeping, you're bathing, right? So you are acting. So if you have to act, why not act in a larger sphere which would uphold, which would nourish, which would right the balance of Rita? The cosmic balance which has got disturbed will have to be set right. So he also points out, we often think that, oh, I'm going to give this up. I'm not interested in this. I will give this up. He points out giving up, which you term as renunciation, is actually not a renunciation. It is cowardice. You have to stand up for what you think is. So he says this is cowardice. This is self-pity. You are recoiling from it because you don't want to go through the mental suffering that will take place because of this battle. This is faint-heartedness. You don't have the courage to take up your arms. And this is egoistic cringing. I'm going to kill so-and-so. No, you're not going to kill so-and-so. Everybody has a span of life and death. So, what is the answer? If you leave everything to me and do what is to be done, perform your dharma, what will happen? And I have done this because I've done so much administration. I've often had to step back because once I say that, okay, I have to do this and I'm leaving it with some higher power over me, it shifts the burden from my shoulder to somebody else. And so it leads to a detachment, it leads to a distancing from the thing. And so once you distance yourself, once you step back, there is an ability to act with greater clarity. Isn't it? That's why we say, okay, sleep over the problem. Tomorrow, it will look different. So, the third thing he says is, this is not renunciation, what you are talking about. And the third thing is, you must learn that you have to overcome your ignorance. Because how do you overcome your ignorance? You think by doing this, you're going to kill so-and-so. You're going to do all this, or whatever you think you will do. Now, if you use the touchstone of dharma, then there is a universal, there is a societal dharma also. You can't, if everyone runs away, how does society get sustained, nurtured, uplifted, progress, move forward? We can all run away and sit in our homes, right? So now, how do you find, how do you know that you are acting without desire? Because you know, our minds are very good at deluding ourselves. You say, no, I don't want anything for myself. I used to laugh when people come and say, नहीं पैसे की बात नहीं है, मुझे increment पैसे के लिए नहीं चाहिए. Then why are you here? Why are you here? Shall we give you a notional increment without the money? Of course. So, you know, you have to understand that what we think that we are acting desirously, or what we think we are doing very great justice. नहीं मैं तो दूसरे 4 लोगों को और आपने ऐसे ही treat किया है. I'm standing up for them. Hey, stand up for yourself. What happened to the other 4? Right? So, how do you know that you are acting desirelessly? We have to understand a few things, and that is, from where does desire originate? Desire comes from instincts. Desire comes from sensations. It is our sense organs which tell us what is around us, which communicate this message to our brains, which tells us this is what it is. What you are seeing, this is what it is. Or what you are hearing, this is what it is. So, and sensations, instincts, emotions. And these all pervade our thought and action. So therefore, desire can take many, many forms, but the most common desire which we all have, that I want the fruits of my action. And so you will find people saying, मैंने इतना काम किया, मुझे क्या मिला इसमें? All the time, I did so much, and this is the return I got. So we are all looking for the fruit of action. And this is because of the egoism. मैंने किया. Right? So what Krishna is saying is that this ego is a false sense of, it gives you a sense of mastery. मैंने किया. But this sense of mastery is a false sense of mastery. We have just figured out in COVID, we are really not masters of this nature or environment or the universe or anything like that. It's a false sense of mastery. It is our maltreating the Rita, the balance, the way we have gone about ruining our environment. That is the major cause of this pandemic. So the key to it is, as Shri Krishna says, Nishkam Kar. Say to yourself, I can only try. And I don't have the result in my hand. So my thing is, did I try? And this, did I try with equanimity? Because if you are passionately involved with something, then that equanimity doesn't remain. So What he's saying is that the core of your being should not get involved, should not get shaken. What is this core of our being? He all says from the core, we all say this, no? From the core of my being, I love this thing. What is this core of your being? Now, here, what really, I won't go into the kosha theory, but really what it is the physical, the emotional, which is vital, emotional, which is your driving part. If you don't have that, you will not drive yourself. The mental, the psychological or the psyche, that is your higher power. That is that is your, what Gandhi said, the still small voice within, the divine's part within. What the Vedant will say, the self with a capital S. What the Sankhya, and Krishna explains the Sankhya theory, which is the Purush and the Prakriti. The Prakriti acts, the Purush remains still, which I think it is the Munda Upanishad, where you have the analogy of the two birds sitting on the tree. One goes on pecking at a fruit, the other just watches. It is your watching self. That is why whenever we do something wrong, whatever we say, our inner self knows, the core of our being knows whether we did the right thing or not. From within we know that. So this is the self, but the self becomes clouded over by our emotions, by our physical ailments, by our mental thought processes. And so it takes on the color of those passions and emotions and the wrong thought process. I mean, I won't go into the Vedanta yet because that is what he's talking about really. But that once it takes that color, then you think you are acting from the core of your being. Actually, the core of your being should be a witness to what you're doing. That is what is meant by detachment, by stepping back, not running away, not giving up. Just step back and say, what do I actually do? What is my real motivation? Would it do good to me? Yes. Would it do to the larger society? Yes. No. So somewhere it is saying that your truth and the societal truth must come together. One cannot exist without the other. Now, many people ask this question that if you want to do desireless action, why would you act at all? Because it is the desire that drives you. It is the desire for the fruits of your action, money, name, fame, honor, even the desire to fulfill what you consider are your moral values, even that, or your ideals. So that is the desire that drives you. So what Sri Krishna is telling Arjun to come, and which is true for us. Yes, this is what desires will drive you to. But when you are doing whatever you are doing, leave it to me. You do with inner peace and clarity. Because it is not all in your hands. Lot of things external forces will happen. You know the famous saying that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Beijing and all conditions are good, then it will create a storm in New York. But all conditions are not good, and I did once a piece on the game of dice on this. So what he is talking about is these two words. You have to act and yet remain actionless. The core of your being must only be a witness. So what he's saying is that you have to fight in spite of what your emotions tell you, what your mind tells you. You have to be a witness to you. If you escape, then what will you do? Now, why did Yudhishthir go into this war without a thought? I mean, he thought, but he was not cringing. He was not saying, I will not fight. And Yudhishthir is, of course, the weakest and the most pacifist and so on. Surely the guilt of that game of dice must have weighed on him. Surely the 13 years of hardship that he has put his brothers and his wife through must have weighed on him. Surely the fact that his wife was molested and he watched helplessly must have weighed on him. He has tried to make peace. It hasn't succeeded. So he acts thinking that I have no choice in the matter. I have to confront the situation. I have to. I have to do justice to all those who depend on me. So, but what happens? At the end, he's unnerved, like Arjun was at the beginning. He says, oh my God, look at the carnage. I don't know how many of you have looked at this streaper. My goodness me, it is one long morning. So, looking at the carnage, the fact that he didn't know that Karn was his elder brother, right? The fact that now it is, as Duryodhan points out, it's a kingdom of widows, children, and old men. What kind of a kingdom is this? He says that all the children of Draupadi, I don't know how many of you know, Draupadi had 5 children, 1 from each brother. All the 5 children are dead. Bhadra's son Abhimanyu is dead, right? Gandhari's 100 sons are dead. So he says, I can't do it. He's made to realize his dharma. One after the other, his brothers, his wife, Vyas, everybody talks to him. Now, as I told you, these are the 2 major dilemmas that they suffer. But every character, let me quickly tell you some very interesting ones. Because every character faces a dilemma, and every character has to reach a truth which is not the conventional truth. It is his own truth. Again, using the touchstone of dharma. Now, what do you do when you have 2 moral obligations which you think are equally valid? What do you do about that? A very interesting example. Yudhishthira. In the Karn part, he is badly humiliated and defeated by Karn, and he has to escape from the battlefield, and he comes to his own camp. And Arjun, realizing that he's not there and what has happened to him, also comes to the camp. And Yudhishthira, because he's so angry and he's been so badly humiliated, he says, have you brought the news of Karn's death? And he says, no, I came to find out where were you? So he says, I went into this war banking upon your Gandhi. Now you have let me down, and you are no good, and your Gandhi is no good. Now Arjun had taken a vow that anyone who insults his Gandhi, he will kill. So he is bound by his vow, he says, to kill Yudhishthira. That, of course, now you have Yudhishthira, the son of Dharma, his elder brother, and you have the Gandhi. So Sri Krishna intervenes, and he says that, yes, I understand that protecting your vow is equivalent to protecting truth, but this protection of truth is not unconditional. Because if the protecting of truth leads to an unjust action, or it causes severe damage, then you cannot protect that truth. And he gives you 2 examples to buttress his argument. He says that there was a sage Kaushik who had taken a vow that he would never tell lies. And one day he was sitting at crossroads, and certain travelers went running past him because they were being pursued by bandits. And they begged him, they said, please don't tell the bandits which direction we've gone to. He didn't answer. Now, when the bandits came, they saw him sitting there and they said, which way did those men go? And since he had taken a vow to tell the truth, he gave the direction which they went. These travelers were caught and they were killed by these bandits. Kaushik was punished with hell for telling the truth, because he had chosen the duty of telling the truth over innocent lives, over saving innocent lives. So, this truth also needs to be looked at through constraints, circumstantial constraints. And you have to reject telling that truth, because to save life, so you have 2 equally valid truths. To save life is a higher truth than to tell your own truth. Now, so does this lead to experience? That will depend on your own evolution of that still self the moral voice within you, the conscience within you. Because at the end of it, what Mahabharata tells you is, that is what Yoga Vasishtha also tells. You have to finally weigh everything and fall back upon your own self. Why is that? Because you are responsible for all the consequences that you, for the actions that you take. Now, whether good or bad, knowingly or unknowingly. Now, I'm sure many of us have had this experience where someone comes and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know this." Okay, you're forgiven, you didn't know this. However, whatever you have done is bound to have a consequence. So you may be forgiven by me, but the consequence I cannot take away. So he says, he gives the example of a hunter, Balak. Now, Balak could kill by the sound, could hunt by sound of the animal. And one day, a very ferocious monster, and the, the, the name is, of course, allegorical, Andha. So he was there, he was drinking water, and Balak killed him. And flowers showered from the heavens. Why? Because Andhra had got a boon from Brahma, which had made him almost invincible. And therefore, he had started killing people, exploiting people. And although Balak killed him unknowingly, but the consequences were good. So therefore, every act will have a consequence, no matter what happens. Basically, what Krishna is also saying is the underlying message, or what Mahabharata is saying, not Shri Krishna himself, the underlying message is that life is preferable over death. Now, this is a strange thing to say where in a text of carnage, but that is, we'll come to it, that is the message that actually the Mahabharata gives. A very interesting dilemma is of Vishwamitra, because Vishwamitra, there is a drought in the kingdom. Everybody is dying. There is no food, and Vishwamitra is roaming around in the forest trying to survive. And then in front of a Chandal's hut, he sees fresh dog meat. And then he has a conversation with himself. Should I take it? Should I not? But he decides he's going to eat that meat. And as he's picking it up, the Chandal arrives and says, "Don't do this. All your life you have upheld certain norms and values, and you're going to destroy this." And he says, "No." This is told to Yudhishthir by Bhishma when he's giving him the teachings in Shantikar. He says, there is a difference between dharma in normal times and dharma in emergency times. So when there is an emergency, that dharma has to change. And since the underlying message of Mahabharata is life over death, if you have violated something, if you have life, you can redeem yourself. But if you are dead, nothing will happen. So, what Bhishma is trying to tell Yudhishthira, you are going to be king. And so, therefore, you must test your dharma, your value as a king, on how you will act according to not just mechanical and rigid norms that you've learned from some shastra or something. Dharma has to be felt on your pulses, and you have to act according to that. Now, Yudhishthir, more than any of his brothers, is confronted with moral dilemmas. And he is tested over and over and over again. Why is that? Yudhishthir is the weakest, he is the least of the warriors of these princes. But again, Mahabharata is trying to underline something. It is saying, yes, courage, physical courage, valor, physical strength are all important. But what is more important is the spiritual strength. And what is that spiritual strength? It is the ability to face life unflinching. That is spiritual strength. Not out of a shastra, not out of a guru. If it is your ability to face life unflinching. So you have the famous Yaksha episode and the lake in which his 4 brothers are killed, and he answers the questions of Yaksha. Now that can be another seminar topic, but anyway. So Yudhishthir is the only one who answers all this, and the Yaksha is very pleased and asks him, what is it that you want? So apart from there are 3 boons that are given to him, but Now to come to the more important one for us is, he says that I want you to revive Sahadev. And the Yaksha is very surprised. He says, why do you want to revive Sahadev? He is the son of Madri. He's not even your son. And he's not even very good at fighting that you're doing. So he says, because I owe a duty to my dead self. I cannot revive my own brother from with my mother. Rather, I have a duty towards mother. Now that requires a lot of courage. Right? Then when they are in the forest, then Duryodhan comes. He is there too. He's mocking at them for their woes that have happened. And he is captured by a Gandhar called Chetra. And when Chetra is going to put Duryodhan to death. So Yudhishthira tells his brothers that go and rescue Duryodhan. And they say, what's wrong with you? Somebody else is doing our work, let him do it. We don't even have to fight a battle after this. He says, no. At the end of the day, Duryodhan and his brothers are our brothers also. Whatever be our quarrel, we will settle it among ourselves. We will not bring a third person into it. We will not bring a third person. And so he gets him relieved. And Duryodhan is so humiliated by when he's relieved. He says, I want to die. I don't want to remain here anymore. Now, again, you have Jayadratha, who abducts Draupadi in the forest. And he takes her away. And then Yudhishthira sends his brothers to rescue her. But says, you must not kill him. Why? Because he is the husband of Dushala. Now, I don't know how many of you know, Dushala was one of the sisters of the 100 Kauravas. So, in effect, also sister of the Pandavas. He says, I will not allow my sister to be widowed because of this act. So, they capture him and they bring him to Yudhishthira, who shouts at him and he's humiliated, and then he's sent back. So as I said, Yudhishthira is the one tested. We can go on with examples, but I'm sure you can read that yourself. And he goes into the war unflinchingly. We've already talked about that. And then he realizes that his victory is not a victory at all. Right? So very often, if you read Andha Yuga, basic hypothesis of Andha Yuga is that whenever we want something desperately, when we get it, we often realize it was not worth it. It's of no use to us. We may as well have not worried so much about it. So, but then he, in spite of whatever Dhritarashtra and Gandhari and everybody has done, he insists that Dhritarashtra and Gandhari stay with him after he's been crowned. And unlike him, he shows them all the respect. He does not taunt them. Now, after he is crowned, I'm skipping quickly now. After he is crowned, Krishna tells Yudhishthira, you must go and study statecraft from Bhishma. Why Bhishma? So, two reasons. Because Yudhishthira says, I can't face Bhishma. I am responsible for him lying in that agony on the bed of arrows. You have to go and confront him. And the second is, Bhishma is a very flawed character. Not many people analyze that Bhishma is actually a very flawed character. When his vow, again, it's the same thing being tested out. His vow that he will never marry, he will never have children. But when his own clan is going to be destroyed and Satyavati, who made him take that vow, begs him, he says no. Now, the larger good would have been if he had actually got the children on Ambika and Ambadika. Anyway, he's a rigid fellow. The second reason is because a man lives how? How does a human being live? From the words of wisdom, from the actions, the good actions. That is what makes him immortal. And Bhishma, again, someday we can talk about Bhishma as a flawed character, but Bhishma will not be the hero he is unless he gives those lessons in statecraft to Yudhishthira. Also, what Krishna says It's only a man who's been embroiled in statecraft and is now lying on the bed of arrows because of his own thoughts and actions. Why? Bhishma gets confused like many of us. He had vowed to protect Hastinapur, not to protect Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana. Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana are not Hastinapur. So his loyalties went all wrong. So anyway, so it is only somebody whose actions have led him to lie on a bed of arrows because of being so embroiled in the world can give you lessons in statecraft. That every action has to be thought of carefully and don't confuse your loyalties. Don't watch evils being done and remain helpless because I have given my vow to protect Hastinapur, which I have got confused with Duryodhan, no matter what he does. Now, the Yudhishthira's final test comes, the dog episode. That's a very famous one, the dog episode. Why? And when he passes that test, Dharmaraj arrives. Why? It is only Dharma that can test Dharma. Now, that's a very interesting concept in Mahābhārata. It is only a dharmic person who can test a dharmic person. A person who is not dharmic cannot test a dharmic person. His thought processes, his actions are not conducive to it. And what Mahābhārata is really trying to say is that really speaking, their falsehood does not have existence. It comes into being when what we think is the truth becomes stagnant, mechanical, separate from the flow of life. So what we call deshka, truth has to be according to desh, time and place. What is, again, the same touchstone, what is good, what is nurturing. So, the game of dice, everybody has kept quiet. So truth will always come out. You can cover it, you can bury it, but from somewhere it will come. Who speaks up? Nobody speaks up except Vikarn, who's one of the younger Kauravas. And he says, no, you are doing a wrong thing. A wife is not a husband's chattel. And second thing is, a question raised in the assembly has to be answered. Of course, no one listens to her. And she is humiliated. So this is, again, that, if you read my Queens of Mahābhārata, a pati is somebody who protects. And here are these 5 patis. And that is why you read Nathvat Anathvat. That I have 5 husbands and yet I am like an orphan. So a dharma can benefit you in the short term, but it cannot destroy them. That will come out. However it comes out, whatever carnage happens, but the dharma will come out and the rita will be restored. We are seeing it in our pandemic. All our exploitative actions on nature, on our migrant laborers, all these actions have finally come to the surface. Right? So, again, you have to think of when you act that what is not for everyone's good cannot be my good also. And what is my good cannot destroy everyone else. Okay. It is Krishna's personality that suffuses the entire Mahābhārata. He himself goes with Yudhishthira, gives his battle forces to Duryodhana. He is responsible. If you read Matilal, he is the devious deity. He is responsible for all the devious acts that happen in the battle. And the turning point is Abhimanyu's death. Once they kill Abhimanyu deviously, he realizes that the straightforward dharma of the battlefield cannot be upheld. And that is why it is ironical. Dharmkshetra, Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra does not remain a Dharmkshetra at all. All kinds of actions are done. He is responsible for Karna's death, egging them on. Jayadrat's death finally. Drone's beheading because telling Yudhishthira to tell that half-truth. Duryodhan's death by pointing out that you can hit at the thigh and kill him. Even earlier, he is responsible for Jarasandh's death. Jarasandh was a good king. He is responsible for Shishupal's death. Oh, he is the only one who sees everyone being humiliated, he sees everyone regretting, sees everyone being defeated, sees everyone feeling helpless at some time or the other. He never has any regrets. He never feels helpless. He doesn't cry. And it is not the deity in him. It is he is acting, and he is asked this question. And he says, when I come to this world as a human being, I have to act according to the norms that human beings are following. And within those norms, I have to restore the moral balance. Even when he dies himself, he is not agitated. He accepts that my work on this earth is over, and so calmly he dies. He is indifferent to all, meaning that even Gandhari, he is very harsh to her. And so what he is trying to say, when in the course of your action you have suffering, you have to accept it with serenity. And the greatest suffering is of Vyas, right? He is both the protagonist and he is an ascetic, but it is his grandchildren who are fighting. And he is in the middle of it all and nobody listens to him. Bhishma and Vyas are actually really flawed characters, but that's another day. Vidur suffers because he's the most able of these three brothers, but he's helpless. Dhritarashtra, the book begins with his lament because he realizes that every time he knew they would lose once they had done an immoral act, and yet he could not help himself because of his lust for power and his inordinate love for Duryodhana. And at the end also, he has to be told that now you have to accept the Pandavas. Do not try to avenge yourself on the Pandavas. Yudhishthir fractured psyche. He can't figure out whether he's an ascetic or a king. The only time he comes into his own really is at the Swarga Arvaman Parv. He has governed the place for 30 years. It is once again a prosperous kingdom. No longer does he wish to carry on. And so he never consults anyone. He takes his own decision that I am now leaving and going to my final moksha. The others just quietly follow. Gandhari, she has to forgive. She has not taken, she always said, wherever there is righteousness, let there be victory. And yet she tried to defend her sons. Arjun, so proud of his Gandhi, at the end of it, his Gandhi becomes useless. And he cannot rescue the Vrishnipu. So this false pride also becomes the cause for suffering. So really, this suffering is for what? Enable that still small voice to think about it, grow further. It's for the spiritual growth. And so the choice has to be made by us, not by an artificial code of conduct. University is always trying to make a code of conduct for teachers, right? Not by an artificial code of conduct, not by anybody outside of us. You can't say, oh, my mother told me to do this. My brother told me to do this. It is you who have to make that choice, and your grief comes because of your own choice, and the community's grief also comes because of their own choice. And every action, there is an error. Birth of Kauravas and Pandavas, there is an error in their birth. Vyas cannot just father Parashar or not Vyas. Parashar cannot just father Vyas and just disappear. Satyavati cannot just say that, oh, you will give up the throne for my children. Bhishma cannot just carry away the three girls of the Kashi king for somebody else. But if Swayamvar is for the person who has to marry them, then Kunti cannot just hide Karna. Yudhishthir cannot just go to the game of dice and wager away everything. Drona cannot get so angry with Drupad that he decides to become dependent on Dhritarashtra and to avenge himself on Drupad. Draupadi forgets the basic courtesies of a host during the Rajsuya of Yudhishthir. Gandhari is overindulgent to her sons. So how do you transcend? These are things we all do. How do you transcend all this? You have to understand that whatever is our action will have consequences. It may bring joy, it may bring suffering, and suffering can only be a doorway to correct the imbalance in the universe, the rhythm of the universe. And finally, you have to transcend even that and say both suffering and happiness are actually inseparable. And that is the only way to break, to get your equanimity when you come to a mental state when there is neither pain nor there is happiness. And we find it very hard to come to that. It takes only 2 generations for Janjay to start another war of annihilation. Because the Naga has killed his father, he says, I'm going to destroy all the Nagas. It hasn't taken very long. This is why Vyas puts up his hands and says, the truth and that wealth and pleasure can be got through righteousness, but nobody listens. And that is why it is a cry of the forest and maid, bound to repeat itself over and over again. Pandemics will also happen over and over again unless we correct ourselves. This is not simply a victory of dharma over adharma. That is just too simplistic. It is actually a message, one, life transcends death, the utter futility of war. Any truth that needs so much carnage to establish it is not worth establishing. That relationship must be maintained between the individual and the collective. You know, our capitalist society, pure capitalism, my wealth, nothing else matters, right? So relationship between the individual and society, and the messages that you have to transcend to an unconquerable state of mind and accept with equanimity all the binaries of the world and never accept defeat, whatever happens. You have to do it, but you have to do it without getting passionately involved in it as doing something for the higher good, for the divine. Now, if I have 2 minutes, I'll tell you what is this, why do we say that? Because every action leaves its trace. This is Vedanta, leaves its trace behind, which are called vasanas. And that is why we are born with certain vasanas, which means certain inclinations. And so, if you do things, because act you must, if you do things desirelessly, leaving it to a higher power, vasanas do not fall. And so you do not suffer those consequences of the act. And so Mahābhārata explores the dilemmas of different characters at different times, at different places, and tries to show them that they have to rise above their limitations, whether they are physical, whether they are emotional, whether, and they have to go beyond everything to become higher moral beings, where they will always do good. How do you do that? That self within is also the self that pervades everything outside. So if you can understand that the big S within you is also the self outside, and that everything is in you and you are in everything, then you cannot do bad, evil actions. And so, you know, that is what it is trying to tell you, that get rid of your vasanas, act without desire for this, that, and the other, and finally grow to a level where you can arrive at a correct decision of what to do. That is what I had to say. I hope I have not overshot it by too much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insights on the topic. Now, the floor is open for questions. I type.
Wonderful responses.
Thank you.
Dr. Geetesh, over to you.
I think we've had a wonderful session. As always, Mahābhārata is something that keeps us going on and on with our thought process. And
Yes.
ma'am, you gave us an opportunity to revisit it for the second time in the last 2 weeks under this aegis of Spark project.
Yeah.
And I would like to draw the attention of everyone to the starting point of ma'am. She started with a very interesting line, which was, there is no problem. Everything is a situation. And that's where Mahābhārata begins from and ends to also, that it is a situation that we need to learn to address. And Mahābhārata gives us various insights as to how to address these situations, not take situations as problems, but to look at them as a way of discovering our own inner self, as well as helping others to discover and evolve. And
Yes.
this is a beautiful time, ma'am, for us to revisit the text at the time of pandemic, because
Yes.
Mahābhārata gave us interesting opportunities to look at chaos.
Yes.
Because the moment one thinks of Mahābhārata, the first point that comes to mind is chaos. And that is why, I think rightly said by Professor Bala, it's a living tradition. It's a book of life and living. So thank you, ma'am, for sparing time for us. And we would look forward to having your support towards our project, this ongoing
Of course.
that
Anytime.
initiated with the help of our scholars. And we look forward to the support of everyone. Join us as far as possible on every Saturday. We're going to make an effort to come reach out to you on every Saturday, but keeping in mind that the way that things go, we are not very sure how things are going to go, but we'll make an effort, as I think ma'am said, that if you keep on thinking about writing and not write, it will never happen. The same way we keep thinking about organizing and not organize, we will never have sessions. So we're going to work towards it, ma'am. We're going to work towards it with the spirit of Nishkama Karma, which is philosophically loaded, but we have to learn to practice it. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Dr. Bala. Thank you, our team members. I now